Good afternoon, boys and girls. I am Mrs. Missich, and I'm going to be reading Chapter 6, Kerfuffle Down in Round Brook. Like a bulldozer, Kenny shoved his toys and books under his bed. His mom had told him to clean his room and drop off his dirty clothes before leaving for the day. The boy ran to the laundry room, leaving a trail of shirts and socks, and dumped his clothes in the hamper. All he could think about was speaking to George about Graham. Just after breakfast, Kenny found himself back in the center of town. This time, however, it seemed like there were even more people milling about. And certainly quite a few who were not locals. It was difficult for the boy to even navigate his bicycle down the street. So he hopped off and walked through the throng, worried about what had brought everybody out. There on the corner of Main Street, old Pop's Possum was describing his encounter with Graham. "It was as big as that building," he said, pointing to the Round Brook Inn, and the crowd all oohed. "With glowing, fiendish eyes and teeth like blood-dripping daggers. I'm sure it had killed and was washing the gory evidence away. I barely escaped with my life." And then the crowd awed. Kenny bent his head low as he passed so that no one, especially old Pops, could see him. "This just can't be happening," he muttered to himself. He turned the corner and ran smack dab into a band of roving minstrels, singing tales of terrible dragons, gallant knights, and beautiful maidens. As they moved gracefully past him, they were followed by a large pack of children with wooden play swords, battling each other, yelling, "I slay you! I slay the dragon!" Watching in total shock as the kids ran down the street, Kenny bumped into a vendor pushing a large cart. "Dragon-embroidered tunics here, and teas," the stout fellow yelled. "Get your official shirt with the Round Brook dragon on it." He paused for a moment, and he looked down at Kenny. "You look like a small," he said, and he dropped a shirt into the boy's hand. It was emblazoned with a cartoonish goofy drake blasting orange fire. Kenny's eyes went wide. He threw the shirt to the ground and got back on his bike. He was in such a rush, he almost ran over a little girl biting the head off of a dragon-shaped cookie. Regaining his composure, he found his way to the quiet alley where George's shop was. He slid off his bicycle and pounded on the heavy wooden door. The sign in the smudged window read, "Closed on Sunday." An elderly gentleman badger, older than his father, answered. He had gray and white hair, a beard, and a mustache, and he spoke a gravelly yet spirited voice. "Kitty, my lad, my squire, so good, very good for you to see you. Why, come on in," he said as he welcomed the boy into his shop, and he locked the door behind him. They walked behind the counter, through the office, up the stairs, and into his little home that was on the second floor. "Charlotte mentioned you stopped by. Can I get you a drink? How about some birch beer, perhaps?" Doesn't want to stay up there. Sure," Kenny replied, as he sat down in the study next to their ongoing chess game. The old fellow had taught the boy chess years ago, and from that day on, there was always a game going on. Because George had told him, in life you must always plan your moves. Think before you act. Move toward a favorable outcome. Now, right now, Kenny couldn't think of chess strategies at all, or any sort of favorable outcome for poor Graham based on what he had just seen in town. He glanced around the cluttered, dusty room. There was an antique clock ticking in the corner beneath a faded tapestry hanging on the wall. A large chest with a huge padlock was sitting in the opposite corner. Kenny really didn't recall having seen it before, but there were so many books stacked on every available surface that it had likely been buried during his past visits. George walked in and sat down with 2 frothy mugs. "Why, here you go, son. It's your turn." "You know," the old fellow said, as he gestured toward the game. "So sorry I missed you yesterday. Why, I was beginning to wonder if you'd forgotten about me. It certainly has been a while, and I've so much to tell you." "Me too," Kenny replied, and he took a sip of his birch beer. "I'm so glad you returned the books you borrowed. I sold our copies of the King's Royal Bestiary last night, and then I had to order more. It seems like everybody in this town is in a frenzy over this dragon sighting. But I can tell you, it will all be over quite soon." At this statement, Kenny's Riverstone stomachache returned. But he had to remain calm and carefully explain to the old-timer about Graham. If anyone could help his friend out of this mess, it would be George. He made his move on the chessboard. "Rook takes pawn." "Bold move," the codger exclaimed, and he moved his knight forward. "So, there's this exciting news I wanted to tell you about." "Can I tell you first?" "Rook takes bishop." "Of course, lad, spit it out." Kenny took a sip from his mug. "I made a new friend." "A new friend? From school? Have you been playing chess with him?" George chuckled. "Because you're certainly giving me quite a wallop on this battlefield today." "No, not a friend from school. Actually, he's new in town, and I really want to introduce you to him. I think you guys would get along really well." "Well, any friend of yours is a friend of mine. By all means, please bring the lad by. In fact..." Just suddenly there was a knock at the door. With a hold-that-thought gesture, George ran downstairs and answered it. Kenny couldn't see much from where he was sitting, but it sounded like someone was delivering a package. He could hear, downstairs, his stomachache was beginning to fade, and he heard a hearty, "Why, thank you, sir," from a downstairs right before the door slammed shut. George returned to his study holding a large, ornately sealed scroll. He was smiling from ear to ear. He sat down on the trunk with the large padlock. "What?" Kenny said. "What is it?" "Yesterday I received a word from the Royal Palace officially requesting me to come out of retirement," George said, pointing out some letters on his desk. So it was true. The old-timer really had worked for the king after all. His stories of life as a cavalier and armored horseman, they were all real. "And today," George said as he held up the scroll, "I received my first official orders for one final task. And it is a most honorable task, I might add." "Orders?" Kenny asked. But the answer was slowly dawning on him. He glanced down at the trunk that had a padlock. On a small rusty black brass plate it read, "From His Majesty's Royal Armory, property of George E. Badger. King, orders, armor." George was a knight. The old gent stood gallantly, opened up his scroll, cleared his throat, and read, "My dear George, it has been ages since we last spoke. I do hope this letter finds you still in the best of health and your little shop thriving. The court has never been quite the same without you since you retired. If I may be so bold as to get right to the point, I would ask one last request during this requiring your special skills for our great land. It seems that there is a bit of a kerfuffle down in Round Brook that only you can resolve. I do hope you're up for it. And there is no one else in all of our land who can handle it as well and as professionally as you. You are such a saint for doing this. As always, I remain your faithful friend and ruler, the King. P.S. Don't let me down. I bet 4 to 1 that you'll be triumphant. P.S. Can you send over a copy of the bestiary? I seem to have misplaced mine. George stood with his hands on his hips, clearly invigorated by the letter. Well, what do you think of that? The river, stoned, had expanded beyond Kenny's stomach. He could feel it rising up in his throat. He knew what George was going to say, but he had to ask. He needed to know for sure. What is it that he is asking you to do? The knight opened up the trunk, revealing a complete suit of armor. It was elaborately engraved, yet tarnished in some spots. My dear boy, he said, pulling out a long, gleaming sword. I am his devil dispatcher, his scourge remover. I am the kingdom's #1 dragon slayer. And that's the end of chapter 6. Stay tuned tomorrow for chapter 7 to see what happens next. Enjoy.